Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. This is going to be a little discussion video that I think it will be a lot of fun and show some appreciation for a current trend and one that I've picked up a couple of knives that kind of fit into lately and wanted to sort of discuss. Before we get into it though, I've got a couple of, sort of standard EDC folders, the Manix 2 Lockback and the Paramilitary 2. And when I think of a folding knife, this is sort of what I think of. This is sort of my world. However, that's not what lots of people think of. And even for myself, for the early part of my life, if you said a jackknife or folding knife to me, I wouldn't have thought of this. I would have thought of something more like this. All right, this is an old charade. It used to belong to my uncle, who has long since passed away, but my family, knowing that I enjoy knives, made sure that I got this. And frankly, if someone put this and this in front of me and said, you have to pick one, without a second of thought, I would pick this one, right? It wouldn't even take me a moment to think about it because this is much more appealing to me, more interesting to me. And in terms of my channel and my interest in folding knives, this is absolutely where my interest lies. However, I will say, and I've said before, and I'm sure I'll say at some point again, that I do appreciate the styling of a knife like this. I appreciate the little details that are, done in effort to sort of class this knife up a little bit. And that general practice is one that I very much appreciate. These days, this kind of tendency, is often expressed in, you know, zirconium and Damascus and all these other fancy materials that we find on high-end knives, both custom and production. And I appreciate that as much as the next guy. Now I'm a little more practical and I tend to lean a little more toward knives of this style. Okay, that does not mean for a moment that I can't appreciate lots of the different knives that are out there, and many of which I've had and enjoyed. One of the highlights of being able to do this as a YouTuber is, handling some great knives. Knives like the Thief 23, knives like the Grimsmo Rask and Norseman, and so I love that high end stuff, but it just doesn't excite me as much as the slightly more practical stuff. Anyway, I'm totally off topic here. Sorry about that. Let's get back to the point. And that is, there is a trend within knives that I really, really appreciate. And that is taking these older styles and more traditional type stuff and taking these styling cues and applying them to modern knives. And even more so, taking directly these designs and just making this design only with, a bearing pivot and micarta and titanium. And, I love that whole thing that is kind of going on right now. And I thought in this video, I would maybe reflect a little bit on a couple of things. First of all, I like when people take traditional styling and use modern materials or just apply traditional styling to modern knives. One of my favorite knives of all time that you guys know about. I don't have it with me, which was stupid, but I didn't want to wait because I've got a couple of busy days coming up and I wanted to get this recorded. But my Benchmade Crooked River is one of my all-time favorite knives. And one of the things that makes it cool is that it's sort of got this traditional, right? It's very much shaped and designed like a Buck 110 or any number of these more traditional looking folding hunters, right? And that's what it's designed to be, in fact. So, this trend really, really connects with me. And I should say, I started out in this video sort of saying this is a recent trend, but in fact, this kind of thing has actually been going on for years, right? Lots of knives have borrowed, how many Spydercos are out there with jigged bone and different things like that. I think there's even a jigged bone in Delica, or I mean, yeah, there is. I think there's a jig bone Delica and Endura. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that exists. And those are not that new. So this trend has actually been around for a while. And actually, while I was thinking about this, I was sitting at my desk looking at this knife, which really, the difference between this and this is not that huge, right? Swiss Army knives, they're a little plainer and designed not so much about being flashy because they were, the whole idea really did come from, Swiss soldiers but they're essentially, traditional style, back spring style folders. Now they've got a bunch of tools, right? Where this has a few different blades. Okay, Swiss Army knives are going to have, yes, a few different blades, but they're going to have saws and magnifying glasses and stuff like that. This is the Swiss Champ, and this is, by the way, a knife that I got sort of as a stand-in for Swiss Army knives, guys, because I'm going to kind of keep this up here just to remind us of what we're talking about. For some reason, it's out of focus. Anyway, Swiss Army knives are a good example of the fact that, the traditional styling and traditional function has stuck around, right? I don't know, in my lifetime, there's never been a time where Swiss Army knives were not sort of at least a bit of a thing. I've got the Forester here, which is a bit of a departure from this, but still has a bit of that traditional feel to it. Certainly the blade shape and the action is going to be more like a traditional, right? With a half stop, and you could talk about walk and talk. I don't know. Look, I will say this, guys, I'm not an expert on this aspect of it, but to me this feels pretty soft. It does have a nice snap at the end, which I guess is the talk, and it does snap closed reasonably well. Let's see how this one does. This is a little bit different. Wow, there we go. One of the reasons I don't like nail nicks is because I don't have strong nails, and even using them this way, which is how you're supposed to use them, they don't work very well for me. Anyway, um, so Swiss Army knives have been around for a long, long time and been kind of doing this where they're somewhat traditional-ish, but use modern materials, plastic and stainless steel and stuff like that, while using more traditional mechanisms and styling cues. All right, the last few years, of course, Enrique Pena, we got to bring that guy up if we're going to talk about this whole trend. And I'll roll in some pictures here because I don't have any Penas in my collection or available to me right now, although I do know Bradley has one. I could have borrowed it, but didn't bother. Anyway, point is, he has done a lot of really cool stuff, and he's taken very traditional designs and made them with modern action, modern materials, titanium and micarta, bearing pivots, really nicely done bearing pivots from Riot. And so, he's been doing a great job, and has some beautiful, beautiful knives. Liang Ma has done a few of the same things. Liang Ma has a Lanny out there, I'm pretty sure, Lanny style. I think it's a Lanny flipper. Pena has a Lanny flipper. So these guys are doing this and doing a great job of it. Pena is the one sort of most associated with it at this point. I will say this, when we're talking about the idea of sort of modern traditional mashups, I think Manly Knives has got to get some credit. The Manly Companion, I've had two of them. They're fantastic, right? Manly does a great job, and what they're trying to do is deliver a non-locking knife that has such a strong back spring and good grippy G10 and a pocket clip, so that it's a knife that's legal most places in the world, but it can still serve most of the same role that maybe something like this could serve, right? Manly sort of set out to say, how close can we get to this using a slip joint? And they've done a really, really fantastic job. Now, some people are not going to like how firm that spring is and how strong the pull is, but remember, what they're trying to do is make it so that you would be really hard pressed to shut it on your fingers, and so you can use it almost like a locking knife and reduce the risk of an accidental closure. Again, I'll roll some pictures in as we're working through here so that you can see some of this stuff. Let's see. Is there anyone I'm forgetting? Oh, I've got some knives here that we can definitely look at. So let's move on to that part of the discussion. One of the knives that I've recently added to the collection, at least for a time, I don't know if this is going to be a knife I'll keep long term because it's a little small for me, is this rustic gent. And if we bring this guy back and open this blade, man, the pull is really difficult on this. So, you can sort of see some of the styling cues, especially in the blade, that sort of nail slot, more so than a nail nick. Clip point design. Now this is flat ground. This is hollow ground. I want to say there weren't as many, at least I don't know of as many hollow ground traditionals, but I am not a traditional guy. So I am definitely, speaking out of turn there. There could be lots of hollow ground traditionals that I'm just not thinking of at the moment or not aware of at all. All right. But I love the blade shape on this. I love the finishing, and they really have taken a very traditional design, just a standard traditional lockback, and made it just a little bit cooler, right? And you can, by the way, open this with one hand, which I appreciate quite a lot. I'm not going to try to close it with one hand. I know there's a way of doing that, but Cutlery Lover has a video about this, and I don't know. I didn't find it necessary. I still prefer to use two hands. Anyway, the rustic gent is a great example of a traditional modern mashup that is, to me, a huge success and a super, super cool and appealing knife. All right, so there's one example. Another example that I recently acquired. Now, I'm just realizing I'm not sure when the first impressions is going to post for this, but this is the Lion Steel Thrill, and this is really cool. So it's a slip joint design, which of course is associated with traditionals, and yet when you look at this, there is nothing traditional about this knife. It's modern looking, modern materials, modern design, lots of interesting features, including, by the way, a bearing pivot. If you watch the Lion Steel assembly videos on these, pretty cool the way they do the pivots. And I actually, Lion Steel's got a couple videos out where they're building knives, which I think are really, really cool. So this here, we have a pretty standard blade shape, and this is actually pretty traditional. Lion Steel also has like the Best Man and a couple of other more traditional designs made with modern materials and to modern specs. And again, I really, really appreciate all of them, although I don't feel compelled to own all of them. This one had a little more cool stuff going on that made me want to check it out. Oh, I haven't even mentioned the pop-out clip, which is a pretty cool feature. Okay, so both of these again are sort of fall into this category of, well, maybe this is just purely a modern knife with a slip joint with a traditional lock. This is more of a traditional style with modern materials and some modern updates, I guess. Now, we've got the Spyderco swayback that I wanted to bring into this equation, and this is interesting. Now, Spyderco, again, they've done this, and this is, again, not a super new thing. I'm I'm trying to comment on a contemporary trend and realizing more and more as I go through this video, it's not that contemporary. But like, think about the Shambowie, think about the Volatin, think about the One-Eyed Jack, and a number of other Spydercos. I'm sure I thought of a few others before I was filming that you could add to this list. And those, I would say, yeah, the Volatin maybe not so much, but certainly the One-Eyed Jack and the Shambowie, they're very traditional looking knives. The Swayback is interesting, not so much for what it has in common with a traditional Swayback, right? Normally a Swayback would look more like this, only with this handle design, all right? And usually not a back bolster, just a front one. Anyway, beautiful design, really interesting, really useful. And I love that Spyderco took that design and then essentially, this is just a modern titanium frame lock. Okay, there's nothing in terms of the action or the performance of this that is traditional in any way. It's purely the pattern that's taken from the traditional side. And this again is really, really interesting. And it's a bit of a departure, right? If you think about what Pena has done, I guess he's got some similar ideas, but most of what Pena has done is a little more faithful to the original design. This is not as faithful in terms, we've got no bolster here, we've got no scales here, we've got a clip, we've got a hollow grind. Most of those things are not associated, or at least things that I would associate with a swayback. Again, I could be wrong. Some of you who have like 1,000 different swaybacks in your collection can speak to this more readily than I can. But again, really, really cool because it borrows from this traditional design, which, by the way, I love. I've actually looked for a number of. There's a case swayback that I really, really like, and just have never pulled the trigger on it. And because there's some other things about it I'm not in love with, but the design itself, just the overall look, I really like. And so this is, to me, really, really cool. And I like the fact that they borrowed the sway back design, but didn't feel too restricted or forced to, have a back spring or other things that would generally be associated with traditional knives. It's kind of a cool iteration of this whole trend. Now, why do I think that this is such a cool trend? Let me bring in a bunch of the knives that we've been talking about and finish this whole discussion off a little bit. Maybe I'll use this as the, hold on. There we go. Maybe I'll use this as the cover picture or something. But I think this is cool for a couple of reasons. One, I think traditional designs are beautiful and they add something. Something like a Para 2, or a Recon 1, they're very, very utility. There's not a whole lot going on here in terms of, look at the fantastic craftsmanship we can come up with. We appreciate the craftsmanship because of the action and stuff like that, but there's nothing showy about this. The traditional designs, they did make a bit of an effort to class up whatever they were making, and they have bolsters and interesting fancy materials and different things like that takes real craftsmanship. Something like, again, the filed backspacer on the Spyderco One-Eyed Jack is so cool. And there are a number of those traditional designs that have this great extra handwork that's so impressive. And so taking that philosophy and applying it to modern knives is really, really welcome and something that you don't always see, especially from the production world. So I think that's a great influence on the hobby overall. Two, I think this trend is cool because it respects the past. All right. And I'm definitely a bit of a student of history. I love history. I love reading about it, talking about it. But one of the things that every generation struggles with is showing enough respect and understanding of history. And this community, it's easy to sort of, and certainly I think I could be accused of being in this boat. I would look at something like this and go, come on, that's stupid. Who wants that in this day and age? All right. And it wasn't respectful enough. I was just sort of like, hey, this is where it's at. This is what I want. This is cool. Why aren't all knife people into something like this? And, I wasn't respectful enough of the past. And so I think the trend brings a level of knowledge and respect into the broader community that is, I think, welcome and important. What else should we say here? Oh, yeah. Because these designs can bring camaraderie into the community and make connections between the sort of modern tactical folder guys like me and the more traditional guys that are, that have huge collections of knives like this. Well, something like this that lands in between the two of us, that has modern materials, that's interesting to me, but I suspect most traditional knife guys should also be interesting to them. All right, or even something like this, where the guy who has a bunch of slip joints looks at this and goes, "Man, this is a really different, interesting slip joint," and perhaps it leads him down a path to where he eventually starts to appreciate this the same way as I can go the opposite direction to have more appreciation for this. So I like the camaraderie it can build, and I also like the fact that this has an appeal for non-knife people. I think most non-knife people, right, if they think of a folding knife, they think of something like this, right? They don't think of this. Right? They're like, what the heck is that? And I've showed some friends and they're like, whoa, that's a knife. Right? When you say I have a jackknife or I have a pocket knife, this is what people are thinking of. And because of that, right, I think this can take, if you were to give this as a gift to a non-knife person and explain to them some of the cool things that this has going on, that can serve as a bit of a bridge as well to get them into the hobby and start getting them to lean towards something like this or this. All right. And by the way, I guess this could do a similar job because it's so cool and got some really interesting, kind of geek factor going on. Finally, the last thing I like about this is it brings a bit of freshness in. And Perhaps you could criticize and say, this is sort of like Disney remaking all the movies, and I don't like that trend at all. That's kind of stupid. The Lion King was fine. You could have just re-released it. Instead, they have to make it live action. Um, you know, there is, I guess, a little bit of that about it, but you know what? There's nothing new under the sun anyway. And so, borrowing some of these well attested and beautiful designs and applying modern materials, modern techniques, modern features to them, I think is really, really cool. And I look forward to what we're going to come up with, next year and the year after that and the year after that, and how this trend is going to play out and what new interesting things are going to develop because you think of something like this, where this is this weird middle ground between, the modern and the traditional. And I think we'll see more like this as well. And, to me, that's really, really exciting. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on this really cool trend, which is not really a trend. It's actually something that's been around for a long time and actually a fairly standard practice within the knife community, but something perhaps we're paying more attention to than we did the last couple of years, or certainly from the time that I first got into it. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out those channel sponsors. I'd love to hear your comments down below. We'll talk to you soon.